This is a truly awful recipe. A completely unpalatable muddle. Shameful waste of nice ingredients. Ran the whole concoction down the garbage disposal. Very disappointed. Wish there was a 0-star rating. What went wrong? Well, I'm Amy the Amazonian, and I'm here to tell you about Alton Brown's soup recipe. It's wintertime, and you know what that means? It means it's time to make soup. And what kind of soup should you make? Well, French onion soup. It's a delicious, savory soup that's got cheese on top, making it filling, warm, hearty, and delicious. And if you want to make French onion soup, of course, you got to look up a recipe online. And why would you go anywhere else other than Alton Brown, beloved TV chef? He's the maker of Good Eats, and he's very good at explaining recipes, not only step by step so you know what you're doing, but also the science behind them so you get it all right. This is a weird pocket of internet history that I actually stumbled upon through a friend who was sending me soup. This is Alton Brown's French onion soup from the Food Network website. And it's actually very good. I have made this recipe before, and I can tell you it is delicious. It comes out well, and the instructions are very clear. What goes into it? Onions! Sweet onions specifically. You could use yellow onions, but it won't come out with quite the right flavor and texture. Butter, salt, white wine. You've got beef and chicken broth, apple cider, various herbs. You've got bread for the topping. You also have cheese for the topping. So what is so weird about this recipe, and why does it have reviews that say it's disgusting, that it's bitter, that it's gross? Well, it comes down to one line in that recipe, and that line is 10 ounces of apple cider. Unfiltered is best. It turns out a lot of people don't actually know what apple cider is, so I'm going to refer to The Simpsons, who say it best.
People don't know the difference between apple cider and apple juice, but I do. Now, here's a little trick to help you remember. If it's clear and yellow, you've got juice there, fella. If it's tangy and brown, you're in cider town. Now, there's two exceptions, and it gets...
Thank you, Ned Flanders. I really appreciated that. So, if you've got some tangy and brown, you're in cider town. This is some fresh apple cider. I live in New England. I specifically live in Massachusetts, where apple cider is a seasonal delicacy. It's one of the best things you can get. And what it is it's essentially apple dregs. You squish the apples down, the clear stuff is the juice, and the stuff at the bottom with the little tiny crispy bits, that's the cider. You can see it's not transparent. It's kind of brown rather than clear like apple juice, and it's also delicious. It's sweet, it's got a lot of heft and flavor, and it's usually something that you have to get locally because it has to be refrigerated, and usually you only drink it during the apple harvesting season. This is actually kind of a late bottle of it since I'm in December. There's two things that people have messed up in this recipe. They may have seen apple cider, and they may have thought, oh yeah, you know, apple cider, the stuff I drink at the pub. No, not that. There's no alcohol in apple cider. Apple cider is pretty much just a type of juice. I know that I just showed a clip that says otherwise. But the real problem is that people mistook it for this. I want you to imagine that you made a soup recipe, and instead of adding 10 ounces of sweet, delicious goodness, you added 10 ounces of vinegar. Oh my God, people put vinegar in their soup. Now, a splash of vinegar, that's actually fine. That's delicious. There are so many soups that you balance out the acidity by adding just a splash of vinegar. One of my favorite things to do is use apple cider vinegar, which is what I've got in my hand right here, in making pasta and bean salads. But don't, pour the whole bottle in your soup. You're going to make a mess. You're going to make a mess. And this recipe is the perfect evidence of something that got lost in translation because people did not know the difference between apple cider and apple cider vinegar. So let's look at the reviews. We're going to just go ahead and show more reviews because we have things like, the apple cider ruined this recipe. Yuck! From Pat Mordock. That was actually this year that this comment was made. We have a lot of other 1 stars, and we have very funny comments like, All right, this is delicious up to the point where you add the apple cider vinegar. I didn't even add 5 ounces of vinegar, but I still had to add more broth and salt to cut the sweetness. Next time, no vinegar until it's almost finished, and maybe only a teaspoon or 2. Okay, Michael, you didn't read the recipe. And of course, the commenters they're just chiming in with, yeah, no, you screwed up. This is not Alton Brown's fault. This is your fault. J. Clark, 293, says, too much apple cider vinegar. All we can taste. Really? Well, that's crazy because there's no apple cider vinegar in the recipe. Caitlin E. at least owns up to her mistake and says, I was another fool who used apple cider vinegar. So sad. Kind of salvaged it with 2 tablespoons of baking soda to neutralize the acid. Now that's thinking with chemistry. Probably tasted a little weird, but, you know, if it works, it works. Anne B. says, too bitter. Too much apple cider vinegar. I consider myself a good cook, but this recipe was awful. 10 ounces of apple cider vinegar, way too bitter, throughout the pot as it was not edible. Yeah, Anne B., I'm sure it wasn't edible because you messed up the recipe. What's great is how many people actually did mess up this recipe and still gave it a decent review because they don't follow recipes anyway. There's a lot of people out there in the comments of food review sites who are like, well, I substituted this, and this, and it came out delicious, 5 stars, which is completely unhelpful to the people who are just trying to make the recipe according to the recipe. So Cynthia C. says, I'm leaving out all the vinegar next time, and I love vinegar normally. Wow, it was too sour for me. You used the vinegar that wasn't in the recipe, but I'm glad it still worked out for you. I'm glad it still worked out. DM Lindskog chimes in with, I've never written a review. Here it goes. Food Network needs to remove this recipe from their website. We ordered takeout after tasting this soup. Really? I thought it was delicious. I think you messed up and you added vinegar. Laura S. is bewildered. I don't know what's with the apple cider vinegar. It was so strong, it overpowered the other flavors and was so acidic it was unusable. I added powdered sugar to bring down the apple cider taste, and now it's a dessert soup. I made it have stock from Prime Rimbo, so I'd hate to waste it. Alton Brown, you failed me. Alton Brown did a perfect job, and he seems to be a very, very nice person who cares a lot about food being good and accessible. Laura S., this one's on you. There's one review here from an anonymous reviewer back in December 29th of 2019 that really, really puts the hate on. So I want to give this one a little extra love. Anonymous says, 1 star. This is a truly awful recipe. A completely unpalatable muddle. Shameful waste of nice ingredients. Ran the whole concoction down the garbage disposal. Very disappointed. Wish there was a 0-star rating. Prepared this for a group of 5. It was rather ashamed and apprehensive to bring it to the table, but it's what I had for this cold winter afternoon, and there was nothing I could do to fix this recipe, which was prepared exactly as directed, other than feel sad. I looked at each face as they took their first spoonful, and I saw the same look from everyone. The anticipation of waiting for something that was going to be really good, and then the awful look of twisted mouths and crinkled noses I rarely see on their faces. The whole group looking at me with pleading eyes that were saying, Please tell us you made us something else we can eat. It instantly turned into a very somber, silent table. One participant quickly pulled out the crouton and tossed it on a bread plate in an attempt to save it before completely soaked up by the liquid muck. I think anyone considering this recipe should first take a tablespoon of chicken broth and a tablespoon of apple cider, a tablespoon of beef consomme, a splash of good wine, and put it in a shot glass, drink it, and ask yourself if that's a flavor profile you can work with before you waste your good wine, your lovely Gruyere cheese, and Vidalia onions. Classic French onion soup is a simple, wonderful celebration, best left without this alteration. My love of years of good eats will not be undone by this one, and I look forward to the next iteration of this recipe, Alton. This anonymous reviewer was not alone, however, because Arthur P. chimed in saying, I was hoping someone misentered the vinegar amount. 10 ounces was questionable. But as this was my first time with French onion soup, I thought maybe my instincts were wrong. I added some baking soda to neutralize the acid, which worked, but then it was too salty. I'll have to research other recipes to see what their ratios are. Their ratios are there's no vinegar, it's just apple cider. It's just apple cider, my man. John S. says, it's the first time I've ever tried this soup, so maybe I don't even like it, but it tasted very bad. Are you sure that it tasted bad because you don't like it? Or maybe it was the vinegar you put in. Gina H., who has poor reading comprehension, says, I would not use this recipe again. The vinegar was not a good choice. Maybe it is a typo. I would like Alton's recipe for making corned beef from scratch, though. Gina. You know, I bet Alton Brown would make a great corned beef. But it's not going to taste very good if you don't read the recipe and put the ingredients in that he tells you to add in. There's a such thing as improvisation, and then there's just, close enough? It's not. I'm glad that some people, after messing up the recipe, go back and try again. J.M. Cox said, I made this once and somehow put apple cider vinegar instead of apple cider. Big mistake. It was delicious up till that point. Made it again and it was delicious as promised. Relatively easy, just takes time. I used white onions, Vidalia, and sweet onions. So look at that. See, you can learn from your mistakes, unlike Deborah, who says, I've made this soup before, but from Alton Brown's cookbook. I used the Food Network app today. The recipe varies quite a lot. This recipe calls for 10 ounces of apple cider vinegar. I checked the recipe twice at the grocery store. I didn't remember using it when I made the soup before. The soup was good, but it definitely had a bite to it. The apple cider vinegar was way too much. I don't understand why the recipe varies from his cookbook to the Food Network app. I will continue making this French onion soup, but I will use the cookbook recipe. Well, maybe you should actually use the online recipe. I also want to point out another reviewer who did get the fact that you're supposed to use cider right, but doesn't know what cider is. Hunter KG said, good recipe. I'll just the poor people who thought that apple cider meant vinegar. I'm in Texas, so you'll have to really search for apple cider. I used Martinelli sparkling cider. Excuse me, you used Martinelli sparkling cider? That's not apple cider. That's apple juice that's been carbonated. Admittedly, the flavor profile isn't that different. You're going sweet for sweet. It's a bit more of a clear and a little bit less robust tasting, but that's not this. That's not this, Hunter. You need the apple cider. And the reviews go on and on and on and on. Pretty much every single review that has a negative or low star rating is somebody who messed up the recipe. Occasionally it is somebody who actually thinks that the recipe is a little too sweet because of the apple cider, which does make sense. A lot of people like a more traditional taste, but I thought that this recipe turned out amazing. But yes, you're always going to find people who don't read the recipe and then complain about it. You can scroll through, and this thing is like a time machine. 2013, this person said there's way too much vinegar. Yes, there's no vinegar in this recipe. I wonder, by the way, if people, there's white wine in the recipe, also used white wine vinegar instead of white wine. Like, they're not the same. I could use some wine after reading through these reviews. OMG, can you say vinegar? That's all I could taste even after attempting to water down this recipe with a full carton of beef stock and another of chicken broth. Ultimately, after 2 hours plus of cooking, I threw it out. Ugh, there's no vinegar. I want to say thank you to Alton Brown for providing this recipe for people to use. And I want to say thank you to the people who messed up the recipe, wrote their reviews online, and allowed me to make fun of them in a public space like YouTube. Because it's funny, and there's almost 300 reviews, and it's amazing how many of them are people who did not make this right. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I know it's not my normal fare, but my internet died today, and I had bought some apple cider, and I figured, we should talk about funny things that happen on the internet when people don't know what they're drinking. So, until next time, pour yourself a glass of apple cider, heat it up, maybe throw in a cinnamon stick, and have a good day.